It was here in the unassuming town of Świetnik that the first cracks appeared in the dam of communism. Essentially, factory workers unprecedentedly took a strike for 4 days, showing the communists that although you could defeat us with oppression, you cannot defeat our spirit. The strike fell, but years later, the citizens of this brave town took to the street in what was known as Świetnik walks, essentially walking during evening news broadcasts to demonstrate that they are no longer buying the party line. The authorities responded by instituting a curfew requiring people to stay in their homes legally, and Poles, being proud, simply turned their television sets to the windows, telling the authorities that even if you lock us in our home as prisoners, you will not have our respect. That is a compelling example of Polish pride. If you back a Pole into a corner, sooner would they give you their life than they'd give you their dignity.
The system was in tatters. I think that the leadership knew that they have to change something, so they couldn't use direct force to stop it. At the Gdańsk shipyard, we had a kind of a center of the protest actions in Gdańsk. And many different factories or offices joined that, we call it inter-company protest committee. And I remember when, at that time I worked for the research center in Gdańsk. When we joined that committee, we were registered as the company number 250 something.
Would you say that there was safety in numbers?
Numbers helped, definitely, because the scale surprised everybody that such a massive protest took place in Gdańsk, because that striking action was crawling from southern part of Poland. But in other places, it never exploded to that kind of caliber. Yeah. So maybe in the first few days there was such a threat and also fear that the government could use power. But after the first week, I think the second was more about negotiations and how much we could gain from the communists.
Not long after the strike in Świetnik, additional protests erupted around the country, with the epicenter of action being here in Gdańsk. The regime, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, tried to contain it by cutting phone lines, arresting key Solidarity members, and blacklisting others from state companies. The trade union, known as Solidarity, became a social movement which put massive pressure on leadership to reform. Using strikes and other protest actions, Solidarity sought to force change in government policies. In some cases, even forcing corrupt officials to lose their jobs. At the same time, they avoided using force so that the government would not bring security forces into play. One key moment occurred when Bydgoszcz Solidarity members were beaten up, resulting in the largest strike in the history of the Eastern Bloc. The significant numbers forced the government to promise an investigation into the beatings. Ultimately, the Polish United Workers' Party had lost its total control over society.
Atmosfera niekończących się konfliktów, nieporozumień, nienawiści sieje spustoszenie psychiczne. Strajki, gotowość strajkowa, akcje protestacyjne stały się normą. W tej sytuacji bezczynność byłaby wobec narodu przestępstwem. Rada Państwa w zgodzie z postanowieniami Konstytucji wprowadziła dziś o północy stan wojenny na obszarze całego kraju.
December the 13th, 1981, martial law was declared. Solidarity members were incarcerated, censorship was expanded, and the military appeared on the streets of Poland.
On the day of the martial law, I managed to get back to the shipyard where we organized a heroic strike being surrounded by the tanks and the hundreds or if thousands not of soldiers. So then it was a question, how long could we stay and resist, and whether to run away when they make the final attack or not. And some colleagues were more clever than me because they ran away during the attack, and I was maybe a bit too lazy because I stayed there and then we were arrested.
A couple of hundred strikes occurred and were broken up by riot police. One of the largest demonstrations occurred on December 16, 1981, at the Wujek coal mine. Government forces shot and killed 9 protesters, seriously injuring an additional 22. The next day in Gdańsk, government forces again committed murder. By December 28, 1981, strikes had ceased, and the Solidarity movement appeared to be crippled. And by October 1982, Solidarity was banned. The symbol of it all was a common man, which is probably what gave this movement such accessibility. During martial law, Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa was taken far from civilization and incarcerated. Describe your capture when you were arrested by the authorities.
Zdawałem sobie sprawę, że komunizm w pewnym momencie uderzy. A więc nie zaskoczył mnie stan wojenny, natomiast zastanawiałem się, jak ja mam się ustawić. Na początku pojechałem do willi Konstancinie, to pod Warszawą. Tam byłem chyba, nie wiem, z tydzień. Potem w Konstancinie, ale do pałacu. W pałacu byłem chyba z pół roku. I potem dopiero do Arłamowa mnie zawieziono. Bo wszystko to tak się odbywało, bo oni wciąż liczyli, że mnie kupią, że mnie złamią, że dołączę do nich. I dlatego, kiedy odrzucałem wciąż, no to przesuwali moje odsyłanie dalej, aż do Arłamowa, gdzie siedziałem do końca i do samego wyjścia.
Czy pan wtedy miał jakikolwiek sposób komunikacji do świata?
To znaczy, ja przemycałem, zawsze miałem przemycony radioodbiornik, więc sobie słuchałem Wolnej Europy i innych. Także miałem kontakt i jednocześnie do mnie przyjeżdżał, co niedziela przyjeżdżał ksiądz, bo mszę musiałem mieć. Mszę świętą, bo jestem praktykującym katolikiem, a więc tu były kontakty takie i fizyczne, i radiowe.
Czy pan nie bał się dla bezpieczeństwa rodziny, dzieci, żony?
Wszystko postawiłem na walkę. Zostawiłem rodzinę, żonę, dzieci. Wszystko to postawiłem na walkę. I oczywiście dzisiaj o tym mówię, ale żona ma pretensje, bo to tak się nie postępuje. No tak, ale ja nie mogłem inaczej, bo inaczej bym nie odniósł sukcesu. Tu trzeba było powiedzieć koniec. Co się dzieje, niech pozabijają nas. Ale ja się nie cofnę. Taki byłem twardzielem. Dziś bym był chyba może mniejszym, ale wtedy byłem twardzielem.
Almost immediately after the leadership had been arrested, underground groups began to form. On April 12, 1982, Radio Solidarity began broadcasting, but perhaps the most popular alternative was pro-Solidarity priest Jerzy Popiełuszko. I'm at the parish headquarters of a church which has a rather significant story for modern-day Poland, and that is the story of priest Jerzy Popiełuszko. Jerzy Popiełuszko was born on September 14, 1947 in Okopy, 4 kilometers away from the parish church in Sucha Wola. Every day he walked the forest road from his house to church by foot. Later, he became a Roman Catholic priest who associated with Solidarity Trade Union in Communist Poland. His heroic activism resulted in tragedy when he was kidnapped and brutally murdered in 1984 by 3 agents of the security service of the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
Jeden z lekarzy wypowiadał się, że zewnętrznie nie był jeszcze tak bardzo pobity, ale wewnątrz brzuch to miał po prostu miazgę, że on się z takim czymś nie spotkał.
Some of his proudest moments included the participation in the trial of those who were arrested for opposing martial law. During the strikes of the 1980s, he provided pastoral guidance to steel mill workers on sites of factories in Warsaw, and subsequently he became their chaplain. The young hero did not cease his activity in face of serious consequences. He even refused to go away to study at Vatican when the opportunity presented itself. He has been recognized as a martyr by the Roman Catholic Church and was benefited on June 6, 2010. So I've just been shown a photograph of the priest in the condition he was in after being beaten, and it was horrific. It's hard to even understand that I'm standing in front of the place where an autopsy of such a horrific crime took place, but I'm glad that I came here because it was an important lesson in Polish culture, after all, and I'm starting to much better understand why the church is so important to Poles. It's a story that has definitely shaped and altered the way that I understand Polish society, Polish faith, Polish conviction, and it was brutal. It was really brutal. I'd like to discuss the blessed Jerzy Popiełuszko. Did you expect that his activism could end in tragedy?
To znaczy, wie pan, tam gdzie się drzewa rąbie, to wiory lecą. I pytanie, kogo trafią? I ja, ponieważ wiedziałem, że są zdolni, to więc bardzo uważałem każdy ruch, każde wyjście, każde to było kontrolowane i nie dałem się wystawić. Ja wiedziałem, że ta władza to jest, robi to w rękawiczkach, więc ani na piśmie nie da, ani nikogo tak nie namówi, żeby nie mogła się wykręcić. No, oczywiście byliśmy zaprzyjaźnieni i dobrymi przyjaciółmi, więc zapłacił najwyższą cenę. To był naprawdę i dobry kapłan, i dobry człowiek, więc go mile wspominam i mam nadzieję na to, że spotkamy się po tamtej stronie.
Support for Solidarity became a unique force. No other movement on earth was supported by the President of the United States, the Pope, and NATO. U.S. President Ronald Reagan imposed economic sanctions on Poland, eventually forcing the Polish government to liberalize. The CIA, together with the Catholic Church and various Western trade unions, provided funds and equipment to the Solidarity Underground. The Polish public also supported what was left of their precious movement. By 1988, international sanctions had put Poland's economy into a hopeless state. Food prices were increased by 40%, resulting in another wave of strikes. Finally, Poland's communist government declared on television that they were ready to negotiate.
Dobry wieczór. W Warszawie rozpoczęły się obrady Okrągłego Stołu. Relacjonuje Marek Tumanowicz.
Spotkanie rozpoczęło się dokładnie o godzinie 14:23. Przy Okrągłym Stole zasiedli...
On January 27, 1989, a list was drawn up of members to engage in negotiating terms. The infamous roundtable talks began on February 6th, with 56 participants. Solidarity, while helpful of some basic reforms, did not anticipate major changes. Ultimately, the talks effectively ended communism. Who would you be today if the Polish people were not courageous enough to rise up against the communist system?
Prawdopodobnie bym siedział w więzieniu albo byłbym zlikwidowany, dlatego że ja byłem zdecydowanym wrogiem komunizmu, zdecydowanym. Oczywiście roztropnym, ostrożnym, ale walczącym, więc komunizm długo by ze mną nie wytrzymał. I ja z nim też.
I see that everything ended positively, but would that fight have truly been worth your freedom and your life?
Zostałem wychowany na wsi na prostych zasadach i dlatego musiałem się tak zachowywać, jak się zachowywałem. Wychowany też i na religii, która zobowiązywała do porządnego działania i zachowania się. W związku z tym nie miałem wyboru. Tacy ludzie albo dochodzą do sukcesu, albo giną.
It's funny to think that such a world-altering story could emerge from small streets such as this one, proving the importance of strong community and national identity. The end of communism in Poland perhaps led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union, preventing nuclear war between powers. And yet what I can gather from it, as the son of a simple car mechanic, is what it really boils down to is unity with one's neighbor.